So today's LFF is going to be a little bit different. We're not just talking about big old sheets of film, we're talking about all formats equally today. Hey there, and welcome to Large Format Friday. I'm your host, Matt Marrash. If this is the first time you're stopping by the channel, there's a playlist of our entire 4th season of LFF. And if you haven't subscribed yet, each and every Friday, we're gonna be here and we're gonna be chatting about something large format. You know, over the last couple months, the film space has become inundated with different takes and opinions on the costs of film. Instead of offering my own take on prices and availability and shipping and all that stuff, I think it's much more helpful to offer something for you at home that's a little more tangible. Does it make sense to save a little bit of money by processing your own film? Can you save money by processing your own film? That's what we're gonna unpack today. So for a little bit of background before we dive into it, I have been developing my own black and white film as long as I've been shooting black and white films, but I also use lab services. I have friends that work at labs, own labs, and in my day job, I also work processing black and white film. So I don't have anything to gain one way or another, but I always love offering people the opportunity to save themselves some money. Personally, if I hadn't been developing my own black and white film over the last decade, I probably wouldn't have been into it. And especially now when I have to double check, ooh, do I need to add that extra box of portrait to my cart? Does it really make sense for me to process? Each and every year, that answer becomes more and more, yes, I should process it myself. But let's talk about those pros and cons of going with a lab versus going DIY. Here are some of the pros of working with a lab. First and foremost, they're a lab, they're specialists. This is what they do. They can do it mass, they can do it at scale, and it's their time, not yours. So whatever you're paying, you're not paying in the physical labor and the time it takes to perform all of the lab processing. Also, they're taking care of the overhead, chemical disposal, all that sort of stuff. I can't emphasize this enough. When you send something to a lab, it is their time you're paying for, not yours. So you are free to go and shoot. If you have a large body of work and you want to promote consistency, sending it to the same lab can really help with that. Also, over the course of time, hopefully you're not sending it to a different lab each time. You're not shopping around. You find a lab and you like the results, and sticking with that lab helps you build a relationship. And working with a lab can be beneficial for both of you. They figure out what you like and you continue to send them film over and over and over again. So building that relationship can really help. In addition, you're also typically helping support a small business. A lot of the larger companies that were also offering film processing are out of the game. They've been out of the game for a long time. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. These folks are often operating on very slim margins, and they're doing this because they want to continue to offer this professional service to the photo industry. Now, not everything can be butterflies and rainbows. Let's talk about the cons of working with a lab. Working with a lab means sending your film in the mail. In shipping your film, you do run the risk of it getting lost on the way or damaged on the way to that lab. You can have larger shipping delays. So the lag time between when you send it out when the lab gets it, then the lab to process it and then ship it back. So you're incurring extra cost and extra time to do so. Another potential con is there are extra sets of hands that are touching this film. Every time an extra set of hands touches your film, there are higher and higher odds that you could have some error along the way, whether it's processing for the wrong time, doing the wrong process, things like that. They only increase as the more hands touch it. And of course, the cost. Some places may not offer bulk film developing costs, so it's a fixed cost each time. So the more you shoot, the more you do have to spend to get that process, both in terms of money and time. Another small con of working with labs, you may not have the same variety of materials to choose from when it comes to processing. Now with color, there's not a lot of different varieties. You've got C41 and E6 and maybe push and pull. But when it comes to black and white, some photographers are a little pickier about what they want, what developer and how specifically they like that developer with their film combination. And that about sums it up for labs. Oh, and as a reference point going forward, I brought together some numbers for the average of film labs here in North America. The average price for processing only for roll films, this includes 35mm, 120, and 220, is roughly $12 per roll. I'm going to use those numbers for roll film going forward. And for sheet films, we have 4x5 inch films processed at $4 a sheet, 5x7 films processed at $5 per sheet, and 8x10 films processed at $10 a sheet. Now obviously this price might be higher or lower depending on where you're at in the world, but I'm going to give you guys some tools to adjust for that later on. Let's head into the lab and talk about DIY options. Okay, so now that we're here in the darkroom space, let's talk about our DIY pros and cons. One of the first, potential upsides to DIYing is it's all on you. You are the one that's entirely in control of your film's fate. Since you're the one that's doing the film yourself, you can operate at your own pace. Got a little bit of film? Don't have to wait 2 weeks, you can process it right now if you've got the time. When you're processing on your own, the more you shoot, the longer you do this, the more you're gonna save. Also, the more proficient you're gonna become. One of the cool things about DIYing is the deeper you get into it, there's gonna be other things that may spark your interest about this facet of film photography that will get you into other processes, or maybe even processing somebody else's film. And that can even turn into a side hustle or even a complete business. One of the potential downsides of DIY processing is the same thing as the potential upside. It's all on you. At the end of the day, if you succeed with your film or you fail with your film, it's the same thing. It's all on us when we are doing our own processing. Also, we are bearing the burden of all of the costs, and we're gonna cover the extensive lists of those costs, but don't worry. It seems like there's a lot, but over the course of shooting, it's not too bad. And the biggest unpaid portion of this whole exercise is your time. If you are busy with a lot of other things, your time may be more valuable than if somebody has the extra time on the during the day, nights, weekends to commit to all of this processing stuff. Another potential con with this is DIY processing can be a very deep rabbit hole. So just starting off saying, oh, I'll process my own black and white can turn into needing to build out a larger darkroom space, getting larger, more expensive equipment for better consistency or speed of processing. So the deeper you want to go and the more professional you want to go, the more expenses you could incur over time. And last but not least, for the same reasons that I'm wearing an apron here and going to be handling some stuff with gloves, these processing chemicals can be potentially dangerous. As long as we respect the chemicals and have the appropriate safety equipment, which we're going to factor in, the chemicals will respect us back and we're going to have a very positive experience with this. So with our pros and cons out of the way, the next thing I want to go into is a way for you at home to calculate, does it make sense for you to process your own film? And instead of just being subjective about it, let's be a little bit more objective. The way we can do this is by performing a break-even point analysis. The way we determine our break-even point is by finding out what our fixed costs are, the costs that we will need to get started and will always be there. Divide that by our sales potential, which in this case would be what our lab costs would be, minus our recurring costs, or in film photography, our consumables. I'm going to go by these items line by line and state whether they go into the hard costs or consumables category. I'm going to keep saying this throughout the episode, but the more you shoot, the more it's going to benefit you in the long run. The first type of cost that we're going to have to deal with in DIY processing are our fixed costs. These are the costs that we're always going to incur whether we're doing 1 roll of film or 1 million rolls of film. This remains the same or pretty close to the same. Examples of fixed costs include space. This darkroom. If this is a space that you already own or you have access to for free, congrats, you already saved some money on space. So if you have to rent out space or create space, for example, using like the Ilford darkroom tent, that is a hard cost. Some other examples of hard cost include the materials, like my safety apron. If you need a respirator or if you're pumping air into a room, that's going to be a cost. Tanks, reels, 20th century camera reel, funnels, trays, graduated cylinders, thermometer. If you're doing temperature sensitive stuff, you might need to buy a whole processor like this Jobo here. Every time you buy something new or preferably used, you're going to be adding to those hard costs. If you're getting bottles, those are going to be a hard cost. If you're going really DIY, a little scale, that's going to be a hard cost. Really anything that you are going to have to buy to get started. So part of your startup costs, those are all going to be in your fixed costs at the top of your break-even point. The next thing we're going to want to consider with our break-even point is the recurring costs. Another way to think of recurring costs are something you need every time you develop a roll of film, and you're going to need to replenish every time you develop a roll of film. Some examples of recurring costs include gloves. A lot of people don't think about gloves, but these can be a very expensive recurring cost, especially if you want to remain safe. If you use a respirator, those N95 inserts for your mask also need to be factored into your cost per roll or per sheet. So your chemicals are another recurring cost. each chemical is going to have its own capacity. You're going to take that total capacity, divide it by the number of sheets or rolls possible, and that's going to give you a per roll or per sheet charge for what those take. Another one that sneaks up on you and maybe you don't think about are the sleeves. How are we going to store our film? We're not just going to like throw our film around. So our storage sleeves, any of our archival tools to house our film will also add to our recurring costs. For my calculations, I'm also considering water and electric as occurring costs. Even if you were to go out and buy a large bottle of distilled water each time you develop, the cost is relatively low, but it's still there. So the more you process, the more it's going to take. And depending on local rules and regulations, you may have to pay additional disposal fees for chemicals like your fixer and your bleach fix or your Blix for color processing. My total costs for that come up to about $50 per year, so I'm also going to be factoring that into my equation. If we're developing our black and white film, very simple with a developer, a water stop bath, fix, and then a water wash, we can factor in 50 cents per roll for the developer, fixer at about 15 cents per roll, our hypo check at about 1 penny per roll. If we wanted to get fancy, our permawash or our hypo clearing agent will cost us another 5 cents per roll. For doing C41, those come as kits and are much easier to calculate because the manufacturer will tell you how many rolls per box they can do. For C41, I'm factoring in for the price of a kit roughly $2.50 per roll developed, and for E6, we're factoring in about $5.50 per roll. So big question time, when are we gonna break even on this thing? So if you're working with 35mm and 120 roll films, if you're doing black and white process without anything like a Jobo, you're just using hand tanks like the one I've got here, you're gonna break even in the black and white process in about 24 rolls of film. So everything you make after that, you're making a little bit of cash doing it yourself. If you're doing C41 and E6 processes, your starting cost is going to be a little bit higher if you want to promote that extra consistency. So your C41 films, you're going to break even in about 40 rolls of film, and with E6, about 55 rolls. The difference in price there has everything to do with the extra added cost of E6 chemicals versus C41. If you want to add more refined temperature control with something like a Jobo, that hard cost is going to go up about tenfold, which means you're going to have to process that many more rolls of film. If you want to do something like buy a Noritsu, yeah, your costs have now gone up even more. They may go up 20, 30, 40 fold, and you're going to need to process a lot more film. That's where you may want to consider opening up a mini lab. Okay, so what about our sheet film users? If you're running sheet film and you're doing something similar where you're processing in, oh, I gotta agitate. If you're processing in tanks with 4x5, 5x7, and 8x10, you're gonna break even just about as quickly. With 4x5 films, you're gonna break even in about 23, 24 sheets of film. With 5x7, you're gonna break even in about 21 sheets of film. And with 8x10, you're gonna break even in less than 10 sheets of film. If you're working with a Jobo, these costs get higher and higher. 4x5, you're up to 106 sheets of black and white, 733 sheets of C41, and 1,177 sheets of E6. When you're working with 4x5 inch films, I consider one roll of film equivalent to 4 sheets of film. Now, some tanks and rotary processes use considerably less chemicals, but I kept the average a little higher on everything just to cover my bases a little bit. Everybody's factors and situations are going to be slightly different anyway. With 5x7, we're at about 103 sheets for break-even point with rotary processing, black and white, 570 sheets of C41, and 797 sheets of E6. If you're working with 8x10, with a Jobo, you're gonna break even in about 300 sheets of C41 and 520 sheets of E6. That is an eye-watering amount of film, and I personally don't know many people, maybe one or two, I'm looking at you, Ben Horn, that have exposed that many sheets of E6 film. And again, this is if you're using something that promotes good consistency like a Jobo instead of using an immersion circulator and a tank. Your results may vary if you aren't using consistent rotary agitation. So I'm not anticipating everybody here is gonna just go and develop their own films, but you might want to figure it out based on if you shoot more black and white or color. My 2 cents, if you shoot a lot of black and white film, you should be doing DIY processing yesterday. It's much cheaper, much more consistent, and decent results unless you're shooting dozens and dozens of rolls and sheets of film at a time. For a massive project, yeah, send it out. I don't shoot near as much C41 and E6 as I do with black and white, so for those special occasions, I send it out to a lab, and that's why you've heard me over the years talking about various labs for that. So yeah, you don't have to DIY everything, nor do you have to send out to a lab for everything. You can strike a balance. So rounding out what we're talking about today, rising film prices mean rising everything prices. I'm even starting to see labs raise their prices a little bit. One way we can respond to this is by DIY processing our film. If you're shooting black and white, I think it's an easy answer. I think you should at least try developing your own film. If you like it, yeah, try it yourself. One thing that isn't factored into this is the cost of our own time. And by the way, if you like this kind of DIY content, let me know down below if you want to see more stuff like this. Personally, I've been developing my own black and white film for quite a long time, and mixing my own chemicals is something I've been doing for about the last 5-6 years. It's saved me even more money versus just developing and purchasing pre-mixed chemicals. It's not too bad of stuff, and thankfully I have a chemistry minor, so that does help with the technical stuff. But if you want to learn more, let me know down below. I want to have an excuse to do some DIY videos. I also want to take a second to thank you so much to my LFF sustaining members. The LFF sustaining member program has been great in a couple of ways. It's helped folks that need answers to their questions really quickly. At the $10 supporter level, you're going to get priority access to the LFF inbox, which is day after day filled with more and more great questions. Keep on sending those. If you have continued questions, you can always shoot them to largeformatquestions@gmail.com. A couple extra announcements before we head out today. Thank you so much to everybody who entered the On-Do 4x5 pinhole camera giveaway. We had over 600 entrants this time. That's even more than we had for the Intrepid giveaway. And the lucky winner is Caitlin K. So this camera is going to be heading out west. And Caitlin has just started her large format journey this year here in 2021. She just picked up her first 4x5 and larger, and what could go better than another camera, a beautifully handcrafted one. She's got an awesome body of work, and I'm pretty partial, even though they're not large format, I'm partial to her barbershop series. All the work you're seeing up here is Caitlin's, used with her permission. Thanks for providing that. And I can't wait to see what she does with the pinhole. Caitlin, if you're watching this, send me some pinholes once you take them. I love sharing other people's work. And for our final announcement, Friday, December 10th through Sunday, December 12th, here at 400 West Rich in Columbus, Ohio, we're going to be celebrating a cool little holiday called Festivus. Yes, a Festivus for the rest of us. We celebrate that here. One of the programs that we're going to be doing for Festivus, my buddy Steven Takis and I are going to be doing 8x10 RA4 reversal portraits. So we're going to have the 8x10 set up here, a ton of lights. We're going to be processing color in here. So if you're interested in an original, one-of-a-kind 8x10 portrait that's ready to go with you that day, consider checking out the link in the description below. We're going to have half-hour slots available Friday night, Saturday night, and all day Sunday. That's December 10th through December 12th here in Columbus, Ohio. Details in the description below. And make sure you're subscribed, because who knows, maybe there'll be like a coupon code or something for Black Friday. Well, that about does it. Thanks again for stopping by, and we'll catch you next week for more LFF.